Beneath a sky bruised with the blood of forgotten moons, a single flame whispered promises of both end and beginning. Leora Ashen moved through the frost-laced corridors of the citadel, like a shadow unbound by the oaths that chained the others. At 34, her hands bore the scars of a healer's devotion, calluses from grinding roots under lantern light, faint burns from salves that mended flesh torn by claw and fang. She was no daughter of the lunar bloodline, no Omega woven into the pack's ancient tapestry. Human, they called her in hushed tones, as if the word itself were a curse etched into the wind-swept stones of Eldridge Keep. Her potions had staunched the wounds of warriors who returned from border skirmishes, their eyes gleaming with the wild fire of the change, yet none had ever lingered to learn her name. She was the unseen thread in their survival, fraying at the edges, invisible until desperation clawed at the gates. The northern winds howled that eve, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant thunder from the iron peaks. Snowflakes danced like errant spirits outside the arched windows, piling against the basalt walls that guarded the heart of the realm. Leora paused in the apothecary's alcove, her breath fogging the air as she measured dried wolfsbane into a mortar. The herb's bitter earthiness clung to her fingers, a reminder of the poisons she balanced against cures. In this frozen bastion, where alphas ruled with the weight of crowns, forged in silver and sorrow, humans like her existed on the periphery, tolerated for their skills, but forever exiled from the warmth of the hearth circle. She had come here as a girl, orphaned by a raid that left her village in ashes, seeking refuge among the packs. They had given her a corner in the undercroft, a shelf for her vials, but no place at the full moon's feast. Rejection was not a blade's cut for Leora. It was the slow seep of isolation, colder than the perpetual winter that blanketed the land. Tonight, the citadel thrummed with an unnatural tension. Torches sputtered along the great hall's pillars, casting elongated shadows that writhed like specters on the flagstones. Whispers slithered through the throng of gathered shifters, Omegas in silken furs, Betas with eyes sharp as flint, speaking of corruption, of a darkness that had taken root in the Alpha King's veins. Morkant Vale, the sovereign of the Vale clans, had ruled for 2 decades with a melancholy justice that bordered on penance. At 47, his frame still commanded the room, broad-shouldered and etched with the scars of battles won and kin lost. But now, bound by ritual decree, he faced the pyre. The priests of the moon goddess had declared it. Fire to purge the blight, a sacrifice to restore the bloodline's purity. No Omega stepped forward to claim the right of intercession. The court watched from afar, their loyalty as brittle as the ice, glazing the outer ramparts. Leora felt the pull before she saw the procession. It was not instinct, not the lunar call that stirred the shifters' souls, but a quiet ache in her chest, like the echo of a heartbeat not her own. She set down the pestle, wiping her hands on her woolen apron, and slipped from the alcove into the throng. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of fierce sweat and the acrid bite of consecrated oils. Outside, beyond the keep's iron gates, the pyre awaited on the sacrificial plateau, a towering stack of oak and holly ringed by stones etched with runes that glowed faintly under the blood-dark sky. No stars pierced the canopy. Instead, a crimson haze hung low, as if the heavens themselves bled in sympathy. Morkant was led forth by chains that sang against his wrists, his dark hair streaked with silver falling unbound over a face carved by grief. His eyes, storm-gray and fathomless, scanned the crowd without plea, only a resigned shadow of the king who had once united fractured packs against the southern incursions. The corruption had come upon him in the wake of betrayal, a rival Alpha's poisoned blade during the last conclave, whispering doubts into his blood. Now, the ritual demanded his end, or the realm's. Priests in hooded robes chanted invocations to the goddess, their voices rising like wind through barren pines. Flames kindled at the pyre's base, licking upward with hungry tongues, the heat a living pulse that warped the air. Leora pressed against the crowd's edge, her heart a frantic drum in the cage of her ribs. She had tended him once, years ago, after a skirmish that left his side gashed open. He had not known her touch from the shadows, but she remembered the fevered heat of his skin, the way his breath ragged like a wolf's final growl. Now, as the chains fell away and attendants urged him toward the blaze, something fractured within her. Not magic, not destiny's hand, but the raw, unyielding truth that one life could eclipse another's fear. The shifters murmured, their forms tense with the scent of smoke and uncertainty. Uivos distantes ecoavam das montañas, coro de luto o advertencia. She did not think. Her boots crunched over the frost-hardened ground as she broke from the line, crossing the sacred boundary marked by salt and silver. Gasps rippled through the assembly, a human daring the divine fire. The flames roared higher, devouring the kindling, their orange glow painting the snow in strokes of molten gold. Morkant turned, his gaze locking onto hers for the first time, a collision of surprise and something deeper, unspoken. Leora's world narrowed to the inferno's maw, the heat searing her face like a lover's desperate grasp. With a breath that tasted of ash and resolve, she plunged forward, her fragile form a dove against the storm, into the heart of the blaze that promised to consume them both. The flames parted like reluctant lovers, their searing breath coiling around Leora's skin without claiming it. She stumbled forward through the inferno's heart, the world reduced to a roar of heat and shadow, her woolen skirts singeing at the hems but holding fast. Morkant's form loomed before her, chained no longer but transfixed by the blaze's cruel embrace, his storm-gray eyes widening in the firelight as recognition dawned. Not of her face, he had never truly seen it, but of the impossible. A human, unbound by lunar oaths, defying the goddess's own decree. Her hands, calloused and steady from years of binding wounds, grasped his arm, the corruption's dark veins pulsing beneath his flesh like buried rivers of night. He was heavier than the weight of his crown, his body a fortress of muscle and scar. But she pulled with the unyielding force of one who had long learned to lift the broken without aid. They emerged together onto the snow-dusted plateau, the pyre's fury collapsing behind them in a cascade of embers that hissed against the frost. The crowd's silence shattered into a cacophony, gasps like cracking ice, murmurs swelling to accusations. Priests surged forward, their robes whispering of ancient fury, silver talismans glinting under the blood-red sky. "Blasphemy," one intoned, his voice a thunderclap over the wind. "The fire rejects no sacrifice." But Leora did not release Morkant's arm, her fingers digging into the unburnt wool of his tunic, anchoring him as much as herself. The air chilled instantly, the heat's afterglow warring with the bite of mountain air, snowflakes melting on her flushed cheeks like tears unshed. Morkant staggered, his breath ragged, a low growl rumbling from his chest, not of threat, but of the beast within recoiling from the purge's failure. The corruption lingered, a shadow threading through his veins, unbanished by flame or rite. He turned to her then, fully, his gaze piercing the veil of smoke between them. Up close, the lines of his face told stories she had only glimpsed in fevered dreams. The deep furrow of a king who had bartered peace with blood, the silver at his temples like frost on ancient pines. "You," he rasped, the word laced with gravel and wonder, "should not be here." His hand rose, not to strike or shove, but to hover near her shoulder, as if testing the reality of her unscarred skin. The touch never landed. Instinct held him back, the Alpha's code warring with the raw curiosity flickering in his eyes. What manner of fragile thing was this, diving into perdition for a stranger's sake? Leora's chest heaved, the acrid tang of smoke clinging to her throat like a swallowed vow. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as wolfsbane's edge, not of him, but of the eyes upon them, the weight of a realm's judgment crashing down. She had crossed no sacred line by accident. This was exile's echo, the perpetual banishment of her human blood amplified into treason. Yet in his nearness, something stirred, unbidden and instinctive, a warmth that had nothing to do with the dying fire. His scent enveloped her, earth after rain, mingled with the metallic bite of his inner blight, a pull that mocked her lack of lunar ties. She should run, melt back into the alcove's shadows where names meant nothing. But curiosity, that quiet thief, rooted her. What drove a king to accept such flames? What guilt carved hollows beneath those fathomless eyes? The priests closed in, their chants rising like a dirge, hands outstretched to reclaim the ritual's sanctity. Morkan's frame tensed beside her, a wall of restrained power, his melancholy gaze sweeping the assembly. Betrayal lingered in the air, thick as the crimson haze above, whispers of the rival alpha's poison, the court's silent complicity. He had ruled with ethical steel, forging alliances from the ashes of old wars, yet here he stood, marked for death by those he had shielded. "Leave her be," he commanded, his voice a low thunder that silenced the nearest voices. It was not protection born of debt, but a king's reflexive shield for the unexpected ally. Leora met his eyes again, the connection a spark denied ignition. Fear whispering of the chasm between their worlds, curiosity urging her to bridge it. Her heart pounded, a human rhythm against the wild pulse she sensed in him, philosophy unspoken. What is salvation, if not the choice to burn for the unworthy? They moved as one through the throng, his presence parting the crowd like wind through barren branches. Snow crunched underfoot, the plateau's edge dropping into a ravine where weavos echoed from hidden crevices, a chorus of the pack's unrest. Leora's mind raced, rationalizing the madness. She had healed him once, unseen. This was merely extension, not folly. But denial cracked under the weight of his sidelong glance, the way his shadow fell protective over hers. The citadel's gates loomed, iron-barred sentinels under torchlight's golden flicker, yet freedom felt illusory. Enemies stirred in the periphery, rivals scenting weakness, the corruption a beacon for war's hungry maw. As they slipped into the Undercroft's labyrinthine halls, the bond took tentative shape, born not of fate's decree, but of shared defiance, fragile as a dove's wing against the storm. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The Undercroft's shadows swallowed them whole, a labyrinth of vaulted stone where torchlight flickered like hesitant confessions against walls veined with frost. Leora's breath came in shallow bursts, the chill seeping through her singed skirts to bite at her skin, a stark counterpoint to the pyre's lingering heat that still pulsed in her veins. Morkant moved ahead, his broad frame navigating the narrow passages with the instinctive grace of one who had prowled these depths in wolf form under countless moons. His scent trailed her, smoke-tanged earth undercut by the corruption's faint, metallic rot, like an unspoken tether pulling her deeper into the unknown. She followed, not out of fealty or fear, but the raw curiosity that had always driven her hands to heal what others deemed lost. What refuge could a king find in the bowels of his own keep when the very stones whispered of betrayal? They descended a spiral stair, the air growing thicker, laced with the damp musk of forgotten cisterns and the faint herbal echo of her own apothecary above. Morkant's hand brushed the wall for support, his steps measured against the blight's insidious drag, each one a quiet testament to the fire's incomplete purge. Leora watched the play of shadows across his profile, the silver threads in his hair catching the sparse light like frost on a blade. Guilt etched him deeper than any scar. She sensed it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his gaze flicked to unseen threats. He had commanded armies, forged pacts from the blood of kin, yet here he was, reduced to fugitive in his domain, the weight of a crown, now a noose of duty unfulfilled. "This way," he murmured, voice low as a distant weevo, guiding her toward a concealed alcove where rusted iron grates guarded a hidden chamber. The priest's chants echoed faintly from above, a relentless dirge that clawed at the silence, promising pursuit. The chamber revealed itself as a sanctum long abandoned, its floor strewn with faded tapestries depicting lunar hunts under crimson skies. A single iron brazier stood cold in the center, surrounded by shelves of crumbling scrolls and vials shrouded in dust, relics of rituals predating the Pack's unification. Morkant barred the grate behind them, the clang reverberating like a final judgment, sealing them in this fragile haven. Leora leaned against the wall, her heart a wild cadence against the stone's unyielding chill, rationalizing the peril. She had saved him from flames. But what flames awaited in the aftermath? The court would brand her intruder, a human taint on sacred ground, her exile no longer quiet, but etched in accusations of witchcraft. Yet, as Morkant turned to her, his storm-gray eyes holding a melancholy depth that mirrored her own isolation, fear twisted into something warmer, unbidden, an empathy born of shared rejection. He sank onto a low bench, the corruption's dark threads visible now in the dim light, snaking up his forearm like veins of shadowed ink. Why? The question hung between them, not accusatory but laced with the raw ache of one who had long questioned his own worth. His fingers flexed, as if testing the blight's grip, the air humming with the unspoken philosophy that bound them. What is a king's strength, if not the mercy he denies himself? Leora knelt before him, drawing from her apron pocket a small pouch of salves, wolfsbane essence mixed with silver root, remedies she had prepared for warriors who never thanked her. Her hands trembled slightly as she uncorked a vial, the sharp, cleansing scent cutting through the chamber's staleness. "Because no one else would," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the wind's mournful howl filtering through cracks above. It was truth stripped bare, her life's quiet rebellion against invisibility, against the Pack's hierarchies that deemed her blood unworthy. As she applied the salve to his arm, her touch was deliberate, tracing the corruption's edges without flinching. The warmth of his skin seeped into her palms, a contrast to the cold that numbed her fingertips, stirring an instinctive pull she had no name for. No lunar bond, no Omega's call, just the visceral certainty that his pain echoed her own. Morkant watched her, his breath sinking with hers in the confined space, the rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that drowned the distant clamor of footsteps. Pursuers, perhaps, or the court's unrest swelling like a gathering storm. "You bear no mark of the goddess," he observed, not with disdain but wonder, his free hand hovering near her wrist, the near touch electric in the chill air. Empathy flickered in his gaze, transforming the Alpha's guarded melancholy into something vulnerable, a crack in the armor of duty. He had rejected alliances for the sake of ethical steel, lost mates to wars he could not prevent, and now this human healer unraveled his isolation with calloused fingers and unyielding eyes. The brazier kindled under her guidance, a small fire blooming from tinder, she coaxed to life, its flames dancing like the pyre's echoes but contained, protective. Shadows played across their faces, painting his scars in golden relief, her unburnt skin a pale canvas unmarked by the inferno's kiss. Outside, Weavos rose from the ravine, a chorus of the Pack's divided loyalties, some calling for the king's return, others baying for the intruder's blood. A common enemy stirred, the rival Alpha's spies, scenting weakness in the ritual's failure, their betrayal a poison deeper than the blight. Morkant's hand finally closed gently over hers, stilling her work, the contact a spark that ignited the bond's tentative forge. "You risk everything for a stranger's shadow," he said, voice rough with the gravel of suppressed emotion, guilt warring with gratitude in his fathomless eyes. Leora met his stare, the fire's warmth mirroring the heat building between them, resisted yet undeniable. "Shadows heal shadows," she whispered. Philosophy woven into the touch, her heart aching with the dilemma. To bind herself to his world meant forsaking her fragile freedom. Yet in his nearness, rebirth whispered of possibility. The grate rattled suddenly, voices murmuring beyond, priests or guards, their silver talismans clinking like chains. Morkant rose, pulling her behind him, his body a shield against the encroaching threat. In that moment, empathy solidified into alliance. The fragile dove and the wounded king united not by destiny's decree, but by the choice to stand in the fire's aftermath. The wind howled louder, carrying the scent of snow and impending war, as the first ethical fracture appeared. Could compassion purge what ritual could not? Or would it demand a sacrifice greater than flames? The grate's rattle escalated into a frenzy, iron bars groaning under insistent fists as voices clawed through the gloom, priests invoking the goddess's wrath, guards barking orders laced with the metallic edge of drawn blades. Leora's pulse thundered in her ears, a human frailty against the sanctum's ancient hush. Her body pressed close to Morkant's unyielding form. He stood as a bastion, his broad shoulders eclipsing the threat, the corruption's shadows coiling tighter along his arm like serpents roused from slumber. The air thickened with the scent of damp stone and rising fear, snow's chill seeping through fissures to mingle with the brazier's defiant glow. She clutched the vial's remnants in her fist, its glass slick against her palm, a talisman of her ordinary defiance now teetering on the precipice of something vast, unspoken. Morkant's growl reverberated low, a primal warning that vibrated through her bones, staving off the intruders for a breath. "Hold!" he commanded, his voice a forge hammer striking silence from the chaos beyond. The pounding ceased, murmurs receding like a tide's retreat. But the respite was illusory. Footsteps echoed in the undercroft's veins, a hunt gathering momentum under the blood-red vault of sky. Leora's mind reeled, the weight of her choice crashing down. She had plunged into flames for a king's shadow, but shadows bred monsters in the dark. Her isolation, once a quiet veil, now stripped her bare before a realm that devoured the unmarked. Yet in his proximity, the cold air hummed with an undercurrent, a pull not of lunar blood, but of shared fracture, guilt mirroring her rejection, duty echoing her unseen labors. He turned to her then, his storm-gray eyes piercing the dim, the brazier's flames etching gold into their depths. "We cannot linger," he said. The words gravel rough, laced with the melancholy of a ruler who had bartered too much for fragile peace. His hand lingered on her arm, the touch a tentative bridge over the chasm of their worlds, warm despite the blight's chill grip. Leora nodded, her breath steadying as she scanned the chamber's relics, scrolls whispering of forgotten rites, vials holding elixirs that mimicked the moon's grace. One caught her eye, a slender phial of crystalline liquid, etched with runes of purification, half buried in dust. She had seen its like in the apothecary's tomes, a relic said to amplify the healer's intent, drawing forth hidden truths from the blood. Not magic for her kind, the texts claimed, but will made manifest, a philosophy etched in ink. What is power? If not the soul's unyielding gaze upon the broken? Driven by instinct sharper than fear, she seized it, uncorking the phial with trembling fingers. The liquid shimmered like captured moonlight, its scent clean and piercing, cutting through the corruption's rot. "Let me try," she urged, her voice a thread of resolve in the encroaching silence. Morkant hesitated, his ethical core warring with desperation. The king, who had rejected poisoned alliances, now tempted by a human's fragile offering. The corruption pulsed visibly now, dark tendrils creeping toward his heart, a betrayal's legacy from the rival's blade, threatening to unravel the pack's fragile unity. Weavos pierced the night from the ravine below, distant yet urgent, the wild calling to its wounded sovereign. With a nod heavy as a crown's burden, he extended his arm, bearing the blight's full extent, veins like fractured obsidian, throbbing with an inner storm. Leora poured the elixir over the marred flesh, her hands steady as she pressed her palms against it, willing the salve's essence deeper. No incantation escaped her lips. She was no priestess, no vessel of the goddess. Yet as the liquid seeped in, a warmth bloomed, not from the brazier, but from within her, a quiet fire uncoiling in her core like the pyre's echo reborn. Her vision blurred, the chamber's shadows deepening, and suddenly she saw, not with eyes, but with a clarity born of empathy's forge, threads of light, invisible before, wove through Morkant's blood, lunar essence tangled with the poison's shadow, a destiny knotted by ancient prophecy. The rival's treachery had not merely wounded. It had awakened a curse, one that demanded a key unbound by pack oaths, a soul who chose freely, without the moon's compulsion. Her breath hitched as the manifestation surged, unbidden and profound. The corruption recoiled under her touch, not banished by rite or flame, but diluted, threads of darkness fraying like mist before dawn. Morkant inhaled sharply, his body arching as the blight's grip loosened, silver light flickering along his veins in response to her will. It was no sorcery of lineage. It was her hidden gift, forged in years of healing the forgotten. Her unyielding compassion, a beacon that pierced the veil. The air hummed with spiritual resonance, the brazier's flames leaping higher, casting prismatic reflections on the tapestries. Wolves bowing to a dove's silhouette under crimson moons. Leora's heart ached with the revelation's weight. She, the human exile, held the thread to his redemption. Her choice in the fire, a prophecy fulfilled without words. Morkant's eyes locked onto hers, widening with dawning realization, the melancholy in them fracturing into awe. You are the Pathfinder, he whispered, the ancient term from the scrolls slipping from his lips like a long-buried truth. His hand covered hers fully now, the contact searing with newfound certainty, the Alpha perceiving her as the key, not to power's throne, but to the ethical core he had nearly lost. Guilt shadowed his wonder. He had ruled with justice's blade, yet overlooked the fragile souls who mended his warriors. In her, destiny revealed itself not as fate's iron chain, but as liberty's choice, her will bending the curse where rituals failed. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, the wind outside softening to a sigh, as if the goddess herself witnessed the unveiling. But the grate shuddered again, heavier blows signaling the hunt's return, voices now laced with the rival's spy's insidious timbre. Morkant pulled her close, his frame a shield reborn, the bond between them no longer tentative but etched in revelation's light. Leora's mind swirled with the dilemma's philosophy. If courage crowns the unmarked, what sacrifice does it demand of the throne? The flames in the brazier steadied, symbols of their fragile alliance, as the Undercroft's shadows deepened, promising trials yet to come. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the Undercroft's shadows twisted into claws as the grate buckled under a final savage blow, iron shards scattering like shattered oaths across the stone floor. Leora pressed against Morkant's side, her breath a fragile mist in the encroaching chill, the elixir's afterglow still humming in her veins like a half-forged spell. The revelation clung to her skin, unbidden and heavy, a pathfinder's clarity that unveiled not just his corruption, but the web of betrayals threading through the pack's heart. No longer invisible, she felt exposed, her human frailty a beacon in the gloom, drawing the wolves to bay at her unmarked throat. The door gave way with a groan that echoed like a dying beast, and figures spilled in. Priests with eyes burning like silver coals, flanked by guards whose armor gleamed with the frost-kissed bite of the iron peaks. At their vanguard loomed Thorn Blackthorn, the rival Alpha. His frame a hulking silhouette of fur-trimmed leather and scarred sinew, eyes yellow as a predator's hunger under the torchlight they carried. The air soured with his scent, bitter pine and old blood, the same poison that had felled Morkant at the conclave. Betrayal incarnate, Thorn had whispered alliances in shadowed halls, only to drive the blade that awakened the curse, his ambition a cancer gnawing at the realm's fragile unity. The pack's past crashed in with him. Warriors who had once knelt to Morkant now shifted uneasily, their loyalty fractured by whispers of weakness, of a king tainted and a human who dared the flames. Morkant stepped forward, his body a wall of restrained fury, the corruption's remnants fading but not forgotten, silver light still flickering faintly along his veins where her touch had lingered. "Thorn!" he growled, the word a low thunder rolling through the chamber, stirring the brazier's embers to defiant sparks. Guilt shadowed his storm-gray eyes, the weight of years spent forging peace from war's ashes now a chain around his neck. He had spared Thorn's clan after the southern raids, offering mercy where retribution demanded blood, only to reap this treachery. Leora's heart clenched, empathy twisting like wind through her ribs. She saw the fracture in him, the ethical king who had lost too much to vengeance, now facing the mirror of his own compassion's cost. Thorn's laugh slithered out, cold as the ravine's weavos rising in distant chorus, snow howling against the keep's outer walls. "Brother in crown, if not in blood," he sneered, his gaze sliding to Leora with predatory gleam, dismissing her as chaff unworthy of the moon's gaze. "You cling to shadows now? This human wisp who mocks the goddess's fire?" The priests murmured assent, their talismans clinking like judgments, invoking ancient edicts that barred the unmarked from sacred rites. The pack pressed closer, a sea of fur and fang, their scents mingling, fear, doubt, the metallic tang of blood oaths broken. Leora felt the weight of their stares, rejection's old wound reopening, deeper now as the Pathfinder's gift marked her not for glory, but for the pyre's echo. She had healed their wounded in silence, yet here they stood, ready to tear her apart for bridging the chasm she was born to straddle. Morkant's hand found hers in the press, a brief squeeze that grounded her against the tide. His touch warm with the unresolved pull between them, resisted, rationalized as alliance's necessity, yet blooming like fireweed through frost. "She is the key you fear," he declared, voice steady despite the melancholy etching his features, the lines of a ruler who had bartered his soul for the pack's survival. Philosophy unspoken hung in the air. What is kingship, if not choosing the fragile over the fang? Thorn advanced, claws extending from furred knuckles, the corruption's origin pulsing in his aura like a shared sin. "The curse was mercy's price, Morkant. Your softness invited it. Step aside or watch her burn as you should have." The confrontation ignited, guards lunging with blades that caught the brazier's glow in crimson streaks, the chamber erupting into a visceral storm of motion and shadow. Morkant met the first with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, his form blurring at the edges. Not the full change, restrained by the blight's lingering chains, but enough to hurl the attacker against the wall with a crack of bone. Leora dodged a priest's grasping hand, her body moving on instinct, honed from evading the keep's indifferent scorn, snatching a fallen torch to brandish like a fragile ward. Heat seared her palm, the flame's dance mirroring her inner turmoil, love's tentative spark or freedom's solitary light. She could flee into the Undercroft's depths, vanish as she always had, her gift a secret buried with the dust, or stand, bind her fate to his, forgiving the pack's blindness in the name of redemption's quiet war. Thorn circled, his strikes precise, forcing Morkant back toward the tapestries that tore under slashing claws, threads unraveling like the realm's frayed loyalties. Blood welled from a gash on Morkant's shoulder, dark and untainted now, dripping onto the stone in rhythmic patters that mingled with the wind's mournful wail outside. Leora pressed the advantage of her unveiling gift, her will flaring unbidden, a pulse of clarity that revealed Thorn's weakness, the poison's echo in his own veins from handling the cursed blade. She lunged, uncorking a hidden vial of silver root essence and hurling it at his face, the liquid hissing on contact like acid on shadow. Thorn recoiled, snarling, his advance faltering as the pack hesitated, whispers of doubt rippling through their ranks like cracks in ice. In the melee's heart, Morkant pinned Thorn against the wall, forearm to throat, eyes locked in a gaze heavy with the past's ghosts, battles shared, oaths sundered. "End this!" Morkant rasped, breath heaving, guilt warring with the justice he had long denied himself. Forgiveness or war? The choice loomed, ethical blade balanced on compassion's edge. Leora's voice cut through, soft yet unyielding, her hand on his arm, a tether against the rage. Mercy, not blood. It's the only purge left. The words tasted of her own rebirth, rejection transmuted into strength, yet freedom whispered of retreat, of a life unbound by crowns and curses. Thorn spat defiance, but the pack shifted, Weavos softening from fury to uncertainty, the blood-red sky above filtering through grates in faint, accusing light. Morkant released him with a shove, the rival crumpling amid his guards, the confrontation fracturing not in slaughter, but in the moral quake of her plea. Yet as Thorn slunk back into shadows, promising retribution's howl, Leora felt the dilemma's spiritual thorn. Had she chosen love's chain, or merely delayed war's inevitable maw? Morkant turned to her, blood-streaked and weary, his hand cupping her cheek in the dying torchlight, the touch a resisted acceptance blooming into quiet vow. The chamber fell silent, save for the wind's lament and their shared breaths, the Pathfinder's light, casting long shadows of choices yet to scar. The chamber's hush deepened into a sacred wound, the scattered iron shards glinting like fallen stars under the brazier's waning light. Leora's cheek burned where Morkant's palm had lingered, a touch that carried the weight of unspoken vows, his blood-smeared fingers leaving a faint crimson trace against her skin. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of exertion and the herbal bite of silver root, mingling with the wind's relentless sigh seeping through the fractured grate. Thorn's retreat echoed in her bones, a serpent slithering back to coil in the shadows of the iron peaks, his yellow eyes promising a war not ended, but deferred. The pack's murmurs faded into the Undercroft's labyrinth, loyalty's fragile threads pulling some toward their king, others unraveling toward ambition's call. Leora stood unmoving, her heart a tempest caged in fragile ribs, the Pathfinder's clarity now a double-edged blade. It had revealed her as key, yet bound her to choices that tasted of ash and rebirth. Morkant withdrew his hand slowly, his storm-gray eyes searching hers with a melancholy that mirrored the crimson haze filtering through the grates above. The corruption's shadows had receded further under her will, his veins pulsing with a silvered light that spoke of partial cure. But the blight's root lingered, a spiritual thorn demanding more than elixirs or flames. He was the ethical sovereign still, forged in the fires of old betrayals, mates lost to southern blades, clans united through his unyielding mercy, yet guilt carved hollows in him deeper than the ravine's chasm. "You stayed," he murmured, voice rough as frost-rimed stone, the words not question, but revelation, his broad frame sagging against the wall where tapestries hung in tatters, wolves and doves entwined in faded prophecy. Leora felt the pull intensify, not the lunar bond of Omega and Alpha, but a human tether woven from shared defiance. Her rejection's quiet ache echoing his crown's isolating burden. She had rationalized it as healer's duty, resisted the warmth blooming in her core, like embers refusing to die, but acceptance crept in now, unbidden as dawn through blood-red clouds. The wind howled sharper, carrying weevos from the peaks, warnings of thorns gathering forces, spies already threading through the snow-laced passes to rally dissident packs. Leora's mind raced with the dilemma's philosophy. What is freedom, if not the liberty to choose chains for another's light? She could slip away into the citadel's forgotten veins, reclaim her alcove's shadows where potions mended without names, her gift a solitary flame unshared. Yet his nearness anchored her, the scent of earth and resolving blood drawing her like gravity's inexorable hand. "The curse isn't purged," she said softly, stepping closer, her fingers tracing the fading dark lines on his arm, the contact sending a visceral shiver through her, heat against the chamber's encroaching cold, a sensory bridge over the chasm of their worlds. The brazier's embers crackled, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters of the pyre, flames as symbolic witnesses to their fragile union. Morkant nodded, his silver-streaked hair falling across a face etched with the scars of renunciation. He had denied himself mates for the sake of duty, bartered personal joy for the realm's brittle peace, and now this human dove offered redemption, not as reward, but as trial. "It demands a deeper right," he confessed, his voice laced with the gravel of suppressed pain, eyes distant as if gazing into the moon's unforgiving gaze. The scrolls on the shelves whispered of it in her earlier clarity, a union of wills under the blood moon, where the Pathfinder's light could sever the poison's root, but at cost, her essence entwined with his, no longer exile but consort, her human frailty amplified into the pack's salvation or downfall. Sacrifice loomed, not in death's blaze, but in surrender. Curing him meant binding her life to the throne's tempests, forgiving the rejection that had defined her, choosing compassion over the solitary freedom of unseen hands. Outside, the storm gathered fury, snow lashing the keep's walls like accusations, the crimson sky pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm as if the goddess herself stirred. Leora's breath quickened, the air thick with the scent of impending snow and the faint spiritual ozone of her gift's resonance. She pressed her palm to his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heart beneath scarred muscle, a rhythm that synced with hers in the confined space. A visceral intimacy born of the fire's trial resisted no longer. "Then we face it together," she whispered. The words, a vow tasting of blood and renewal, her unyielding will flaring once more to illuminate the chamber in soft silver glow. The corruption recoiled at the contact, threads dissolving like mist before her touch, but the rite called for more, a deliberate merging, her light poured into his shadows, healing through union's forge. Morkant's hand cupped the back of her neck, drawing her closer, his melancholy fracturing into a quiet ferocity, the alpha accepting what duty had long denied. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling in the chill, the moment stretching eternal, as the wind's lament softened to a hush. No grand incantation marked it. Only the raw choice, her fragile frame against his unyielding strength, dove diving once more into flame's embrace. The silver light surged, weaving through them like lunar threads, the blight's core fracturing under the weight of her compassion. A cure not of magic, but of souls choosing mercy over isolation. Pain lanced through her, sharp as winter's bite, visions flashing. His past guilts laid bare, battles where he had spared foes only to reap betrayal, her own rejections transmuted into power's quiet roar. Yet in the agony's heart bloomed tenderness, born of the pyre's pain, a romantic tragedy where love proved itself through trial, not triumph. The rite crested, the chamber trembling as if the earth itself bore witness, embers flaring to life in the brazier with a whoosh that mirrored their shared exhale. Morkant pulled back, his eyes clear now, the corruption banished, silver light fading to the warm gold of renewed vigor. But the cost etched itself in her, a faint weariness in her limbs, the Pathfinder's essence dimmed yet transformed, bound irrevocably to his fate. Weavos rose triumphant from the ravine, the pack sensing the shift, loyalty's tide turning against Thorn's shadow. Leora swayed, his arms encircling her, the embrace a Renascimento's first breath. Union forged in choice, not compulsion, her rejection alchemized into the realm's quiet savior. Yet doubt lingered, spiritual and ethical. Had she sacrificed freedom for his crown, or found in the binding a liberty deeper than solitude's veil? The wind carried the promise of dawn through the blood-red night, flames steady as their intertwined shadows, the dilemma unresolved. In redemption's light, what scars does healing leave upon the healer? The dawn bled through the fractured grates like a hesitant wound, crimson fading to the pale silver of a moon's reluctant surrender. Leora's body trembled in Morkant's arms, the rite's echo a deep ache woven into her bones, as if the flames she had braved had claimed a silent toll. Her skin prickled with the chamber's chill, snow's whisper seeping in to kiss the sweat-damp curve of her neck, mingling with the faint coppery scent of his healed blood. The brazier's embers glowed low now, casting their intertwined shadows, long and intimate across the tatters of ancient tapestries, wolves yielding to the dove's unburnt wing, a prophecy etched not in ink, but in the raw pulse of their shared breath. She felt the weight of it all. The corruption's banishment, a shadow lifted from his veins, leaving him whole yet forever marked by her light. But wholeness came laced with sacrifice. Her Pathfinder's essence dimmed, a fragile flame stretched thin across the chasm of their union. Morkant held her steady, his broad frame a bastion against the Undercroft's encroaching frost, his touch gentle as if she were spun from the first snowflake of winter. At 47, he bore the scars of a reign forged in ethical fires, guilt for the mates he had not claimed, the mercies that invited blades like thorns. His storm-gray eyes, cleared of the blight's haze, searched her face with a melancholy reverence, the lines around them deepening like ravines carved by unspoken regrets. "Leora," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "Roughened by the gravel of survival, you have given what no right could demand." His fingers traced the faint weariness in her features, the subtle pallor that spoke of her human limits pushed beyond the moon's grace. She leaned into him, the warmth of his chest seeping through her singed wool, a visceral anchor against the spiritual vertigo swirling in her core. Rejection's old ghost lingered, the pack's indifference now a mirror to her choice. To bind her unseen life to his throne, or fade back into the alcove's solitude, her gift a solitary ember unshared. The wind outside shifted, carrying the triumphant Weavos from the ravine upward, a chorus swelling through the iron peaks like the realm's awakening breath. The pack sensed it, the corruption purged, their king's blood restored to lunar purity, loyalty's tide turning, whispers of Thorn's defeat rippling through the citadel's veins. Footsteps echoed distantly now, not of pursuit, but of hesitant allegiance, guards and omegas drawn by the silver light that had briefly illuminated the Undercroft's gloom. Leora's heart clenched, a romantic ache blooming amid the pain. Tenderness forged in the pyre's trial, where love proved itself not as easy reward, but as the deliberate choice to heal another's fracture at the cost of one's own edges. She had resisted it in the sanctum's hush, rationalized the pull as healer's instinct, but acceptance settled now like snow on barren ground. Unyielding, inevitable. His scent enveloped her, earth renewed after storm, mingling with the faint ozone of her spent gift, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched once more, breaths sinking in the confined hush. Yet doubt's thorn pierced the moment, ethical and profound. The rite had cured him, but the realm's wounds festered, Thorn's shadow coiled in the passes, rallying dissidents with promises of power untainted by mercy. Morkant's rule, once a melancholy bulwark against war, now demanded her at its side, not as consort in silken furs, but as pathfinder, her human will the key to forging alliances from betrayal's ashes. "The Pax will come," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against her ear, laced with the guilt of one who had long shouldered solitude for their sake. "They will see you not as intruder, but as the dove that bent the flames. But it asks everything of you, your freedom, traded for their fragile peace." His hand slid to her waist, possessive yet tender, the contact igniting a slow burn in her veins, a sensory tide of heat against the chamber's bite. Leora pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his, the silver residue of her light flickering in their depths like captured moonlight on snow. Philosophy stirred in the silence between them. What is rebirth, if not the faith to choose compassion's chain over despair's solitary flight? She thought of the apothecary's alcove, vials waiting like forgotten dreams, her life a quiet exile mending warriors who never turned. That freedom had been her armor, cold but unyielding. Yet in his gaze, destiny revealed itself not as iron decree, but as liberty's bold stroke, her unmarked blood transcending hierarchies, proving courage's truth under the blood-red sky. The wind howled once more, gusting snow through the broken grate to dust their shoulders like sacred ash, Weavos harmonizing into a spiritual hymn. Leora's hand rose to cup his jaw, feeling the stubble rough as frost-bitten pine, her touch a vow unspoken. "I choose you," she whispered, the words tasting of blood and renewal, her will flaring one final time, not to purge, but to unite. Not for the crown, but for the man who spared the blade when vengeance howled. Let the world witness. Redemption is no throne's gift, but a soul's unburnt wing. Morkant's response was a kiss, slow and profound, his lips claiming hers with the restrained ferocity of an alpha long denied. The world narrowed to the salt of his skin, the warmth of his breath mingling with hers, tenderness rising from the tragedy's embers, a love accepted in the heart of winter's grasp. The chamber seemed to sigh, the brazier's remnants flaring briefly as if the goddess approved, flames dancing shadows of their entwined forms across the walls. Outside, the pack gathered at the citadel's gates, torches blooming like stars against the paling sky, their forms silhouetted in fur and steel, ready to kneel before the king and his unlikely queen. Thorn's threat loomed distant now, a storm deferred by the moral quake of her choice, war's maw held at bay by compassion's quiet roar. Leora felt the rebirth settle in her chest, a spiritual lightness amid the weariness, rejection alchemized into destiny's embrace. No longer the fragile dove, but the flame's unyielding heart, she stood with him as the Undercroft's door creaked open, silver light spilling forth to greet the dawn. The northern winds carried their story onward, a tale of fragile will defying lunar blood, where love's proof etched scars of gold upon the soul. In the realm's awakening, under a sky washing clean of crimson, the world bore witness. Courage blooms not from lineage, but from the choice to dive once more into the fire, emerging whole in another's light. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.